July 8, 1944. 830 hours. POW Camp 21, Herefordshire, England. Private William Foster stood before 40 German prisoners in the camp's assembly area, a portable blackboard propped awkwardly against the fence behind him. On the board, written in careful English handwriting, were phonetic German phrases. Guten Morgen, good morning, halt, stop, kommen Sie hier, come here, danke, thank you. Foster cleared his throat, acutely aware he was about to make a fool of himself. Right then, I'm going to try saying these. You lot tell me if I'm getting it wrong. He pointed to the first phrase. Guten Morgen. The prisoners stared in silence for 3 seconds. Then one, a former Feldwebel named Klaus Weber, burst out laughing. Guten Morgen, the U is different, like U but shorter. Guten. Foster tried again. Guten? Better. Yes, that is correct. Another prisoner called out, Why you learn German? You are guards. You give orders, we obey. No need talk. Foster lowered the chalk. Because I'd rather understand what you're saying and have you understand me properly. Shouting doesn't work if nobody knows what's being shouted. Seems more efficient to just learn enough German to communicate properly. The practical reasoning was characteristically British, not sentimental desire for friendship, not grand gesture of reconciliation, just pragmatic recognition that supervision worked better when guards and prisoners could actually communicate. But the effect was profound. These German soldiers had expected British guards to treat them with barely concealed hostility, issuing orders through translators or gestures, maintaining maximum distance between captors and captives. Instead, here was British private spending his morning attempting to learn their language so he could talk to them directly. The communication problem. British POW camps in 1944 faced significant practical challenge. How to manage thousands of German prisoners when most guards spoke no German and most prisoners spoke minimal English. The problem affected every aspect of camp operations. Work assignments required explaining tasks. Difficult when gestures were the primary communication method. Medical needs had to be communicated. Potentially dangerous when patients couldn't describe symptoms. Discipline required prisoners understanding rules and consequences. Impossible when guards couldn't explain regulations clearly. Even basic daily routines became complicated when guards couldn't simply tell prisoners what was happening and why. Traditional solution was employing interpreters, German-speaking British personnel, or English-speaking German prisoners who translated between guards and general prison population. This worked, but created dependencies and delays. Guards needed interpreters present for every interaction. Simple communications became lengthy processes involving 3 people. The inefficiency frustrated everyone. Camp 21's commandant, Major Robert Ashford, recognized that teaching guards basic German would improve camp operations significantly. Guards who could give simple orders, ask basic questions, and understand common responses would be more effective supervisors. The language training wouldn't create fluency. That would require time and instruction beyond what was practical. But teaching guards 50 to 100 essential phrases would enable direct communication for most routine situations. Ashford proposed the idea at officers' meeting in June 1944. The response was mixed. Some officers worried it was unnecessary fraternization. Others questioned whether average British soldiers could learn enough German to be useful. Ashford's argument was purely practical. Better communication meant better camp management, fewer misunderstandings, improved efficiency. Nothing about friendship or reconciliation, just operational improvement through basic language training. The program began with volunteers. Guards interested in learning German would receive instruction from German-speaking British personnel, supplemented by practice with prisoners who could correct pronunciation and usage. The training would occur during off-duty hours. No one was required to participate, but those who did would receive small benefits like preferred shift assignments. The first lessons. Foster volunteered immediately when the program was announced. He'd been working as camp guard for 2 months and found the communication barriers frustrating. Trying to supervise work details through gestures and shouting felt inefficient and undignified. Learning basic German seemed like obvious solution. The initial instruction came from Lieutenant Peter Hammond, who'd studied German at Cambridge before the war. Hammond provided phrasebook with essential phrases organized by situation, work commands, medical terms, disciplinary language, daily routine vocabulary. The phrases were written phonetically to help guards with no language training background. Foster spent evenings studying the phrasebook, practicing pronunciation alone in his barracks. The German language was difficult. Different sounds, unfamiliar grammar, pronunciation that felt awkward in his Yorkshire accent. But he persisted, memorizing phrases through repetition, testing himself until words became automatic. The breakthrough came when Hammond suggested Foster practice with actual prisoners. The phrasebook gives you correct German, but you need to know if you're actually saying it comprehensibly. Prisoners will tell you if your pronunciation is incomprehensible. Use them as teachers. Most will be flattered that you're making the effort. Foster approached several prisoners during work detail, asking them to listen to his German and correct obvious errors. The prisoner's initial reaction was surprise, bordering on disbelief. British guards learning German. Why? The propaganda had portrayed British as arrogant imperialists who demanded everyone speak English. Yet here was British soldier asking for help pronouncing German correctly. Klaus Weber, the former Feldwebel who'd laughed at Foster's first attempt at Guten Morgen, became informal language tutor. During breaks in work details, Foster would practice phrases while Klaus corrected pronunciation, explained common mistakes, offered alternative ways to express ideas. The interaction was peculiar. Prisoner teaching captor the prisoner's own language, but both men found it valuable. Foster's German improved rapidly with regular practice. Klaus found teaching gave him purpose beyond routine labor. Other guards noticed Foster's progress and began their own German study. Within weeks, a dozen guards at Camp 21 were studying basic German, practicing with prisoners who'd become inadvertent language instructors, slowly developing ability to communicate directly without interpreters. The practical benefits. The communication improvements had immediate operational impact. Work details functioned more smoothly when guards could explain tasks in German rather than relying on gestures. Fällen Sie diesen Baum, cut down this tree, was clearer than pointing and making cutting motions. Reparieren Sie den Zaun, repair the fence, was more specific than gesturing vaguely at damaged fencing. The German-speaking guards could give detailed instructions, answer questions about technique, provide feedback on work quality, all of which improved efficiency significantly. Medical situations became safer. Guard who could ask, "Wo tut es weh?" Where does it hurt? Could assess medical needs more quickly than guard who had to find interpreter. Understanding responses like mein Bein, my leg, or mein Kopf, my head, enabled faster response to injuries or illnesses. The language capability potentially saved lives in situations where immediate understanding was critical. Discipline improved because prisoners understood rules and consequences clearly. Guards who could explain "Das ist verboten" that is forbidden, and Sie werden bestraft, you will be punished, could enforce regulations without confusion about what was prohibited or why punishment was being imposed. The clarity reduced tensions that came from prisoners not understanding what they'd done wrong. Daily routines ran more smoothly. Guards could announce Essenszeit, mealtime, Appell, roll call, Arbeit fertig, work finished, without needing interpreters for basic scheduling. Prisoners appreciated knowing what was happening and when. The predictability reduced anxiety and improved compliance. The psychological impact exceeded practical benefits. Prisoners who'd expected hostile treatment from British guards found instead that captors were making genuine effort to communicate in prisoners' language. The gesture suggested respect, that British valued clear communication enough to learn German, rather than forcing prisoners to struggle with English. The respect was reciprocated. Prisoners worked more cooperatively with guards who made language effort than with guards who remained linguistically isolated. The cultural exchange. Language learning created opportunities for broader cultural exchange between guards and prisoners. Foster's German improved beyond basic commands and questions. He began learning conversational phrases, asking prisoners about their lives, their families, their experiences. Woher kommen Sie? Where are you from? Led to discussions about prisoners' hometowns, descriptions of cities and regions Foster had never visited, stories about life in Germany before the war, comparisons between British and German customs. Klaus Weber described Hamburg before bombing, the harbour, the architecture, the culture of North German commercial city. Foster described Yorkshire, the countryside, the mills, the practical character of Northern English people. The conversations revealed similarities that propaganda had obscured. Both men came from industrial regions where people worked hard and valued directness. Both had families affected by war. Both missed homes and hoped war would end soon so they could return to normal lives. Other guards and prisoners engaged in similar exchanges. Language became a bridge that enabled human connection beyond the captor-captive relationship. Prisoners taught guards German songs, explained German idioms, described cultural practices. Guards reciprocated, teaching English phrases, explaining British customs, sharing aspects of their lives. The exchanges weren't friendship exactly. The power imbalance prevented genuine equality, but they were human interactions that acknowledged shared humanity across national divisions. The football matches became particularly important sites of cultural exchange. Guards and prisoners played mixed teams, communicating in blend of German, English, and universal football terminology. Pass worked in either language. Tor, goal, was celebrated bilingually. The matches created context where language barriers mattered less than shared love of sport, where Germans and British competed and cooperated based on football skill rather than nationality. The letters. One unexpected benefit of guards' German language skills was assistance with prisoner correspondence. German prisoners were permitted to write letters home under censorship. British censors reviewed all mail to prevent security breaches, but many prisoners struggled to write in English for censors or needed help expressing complex thoughts in limited vocabulary. Guards with German language skills could assist, helping prisoners compose letters, translating sections that needed clarification, ensuring letters expressed what prisoners actually intended to say. Foster found himself helping prisoners write to families in Germany. The letters were often difficult, explaining that they were alive and healthy but imprisoned, trying to reassure families despite being unable to provide specific information about location or conditions, expressing hope for eventual repatriation while acknowledging uncertainty about when that might occur. One letter Foster helped Klaus write particularly affected him. Klaus was writing to his wife in Hamburg, explaining that he was safe, well treated, working on English farm. But between formal phrases, Klaus wanted to express deeper feelings: loneliness, fear for his family's safety during continued bombing, hope that they'd be reunited when war ended. Foster helped find English words that captured Klaus's meaning while remaining within censorship guidelines. The letter concluded with Klaus asking Foster to write a small note explaining that British Guard had helped with translation, that guards at camp treated prisoners fairly, that his wife shouldn't worry about him being mistreated. Foster added brief message confirming Klaus's good treatment and expressing hope that war would end soon so prisoners could return to families. The letter was sent through proper channels. Weeks later, Klaus received reply from his wife, thanking him for reassurance and thanking the British Guard who'd helped him write. Foster never met Klaus's wife, but helping facilitate communication between separated family members felt meaningful in a way that guard duty typically didn't. The resistance. Not everyone approved of guards learning German and developing relationships with prisoners. Some British personnel viewed the language learning as unnecessary fraternization. The prisoners were enemies who'd fought for Nazi regime, killed British soldiers, supported Hitler's wars of aggression. Treating them with minimal courtesy, required by Geneva Conventions, was one thing. Making active effort to communicate in their language and develop personal relationships was something else, potentially disloyal or at least inappropriate. Major Ashford addressed these concerns directly at officers' meeting. The language training serves operational purposes. Guards who can communicate with prisoners are more effective supervisors. That's the primary justification. If personal relationships develop as side effect, that's acceptable as long as security and discipline are maintained. We're not asking guards to befriend prisoners. We're asking them to communicate effectively, which requires basic language capability. Among prisoners, reactions were also mixed. Some appreciated guards' language efforts and reciprocated by helping with instruction. Others remained suspicious, wondering if language learning was intelligence-gathering technique, if guards who spoke German were attempting to extract information through casual conversation. A few hardcore Nazis actively discouraged cooperation, viewing any positive interaction with British forces as betrayal of German cause. The majority fell between extremes, appreciating improved communication without reading deeper significance into it, helping guards with pronunciation because it made daily interactions smoother, maintaining appropriate distance while acknowledging that guards learning German was preferable to guards who couldn't communicate at all. The expansion. The success at Camp 21 led to similar programs at other British POW camps. By late 1944, dozens of camps across Britain were teaching guards basic German. The programs varied. Some were formal instruction, led by German-speaking officers. Others were informal arrangements, where guards practiced with prisoners. Some used phrasebooks, while others developed their own materials. But common element was recognition that language capability improved camp operations. The results were consistently positive. Camps with German-speaking guards reported better discipline, improved work output, fewer misunderstandings, and generally smoother operations than camps where communication remained entirely dependent on interpreters. The operational improvements validated Ashford's original practical justification. Language training made guards more effective at their jobs. The prisoners' responses were remarkably similar across camps. Initial surprise that British guards would learn German. Gradual appreciation for improved communication. Willingness to help with language instruction. Recognition that guards making language effort represented form of respect, acknowledging prisoners' humanity enough to learn their language rather than forcing them to struggle with English. The programs influenced post-war German attitudes toward Britain in ways that weren't obvious at the time, but became clear later. German soldiers who'd been prisoners in British camps where guards learned German carried memories of that respect throughout their lives. When they described their captivity experiences to families and friends, they emphasized that British guards had made genuine effort to communicate, that respect had been shown even in prison camp setting, that British had maintained civilized standards even when dealing with defeated enemies. The post-war reconnection. Years after the war, Foster maintained correspondence with Klaus Weber. The relationship had begun with language lessons during captivity, Klaus teaching Foster German, Foster helping Klaus write letters home. After Klaus was repatriated in 1946, they'd exchanged a few letters, then gradually lost contact as both men rebuilt post-war lives. In 1965, Foster took holiday to Germany with his wife. On impulse, he attempted to locate Klaus in Hamburg. Using old address from letters written 20 years earlier, he sent message through German postal service. The reply came within weeks. Klaus still lived in Hamburg, had rebuilt successful business career, would be delighted to meet former guard who'd helped him during captivity. The reunion was emotional. Both men were older, carrying decades of accumulated experience since their last meeting in POW camp. But the connection remained. Shared memory of time when Foster was learning German and Klaus was teaching him, when captor and captive had found common ground through language study, when human relationship had developed despite circumstances that should have prevented it. They spent 3 days together. Foster met Klaus's wife, the woman whose letters he'd helped translate 20 years earlier. Klaus showed Foster rebuilt Hamburg, describing reconstruction process, explaining how Germany had transformed from destroyed dictatorship to prosperous democracy. Foster described changes in Britain, his career after military service, his family. They discussed the war carefully, acknowledging its horrors while focusing on moment when they'd connected as human beings rather than enemies. Klaus credited Foster's language learning with helping him maintain hope during captivity, proving British weren't monsters propaganda described, demonstrating that communication and mutual respect could exist even in prison camp. Foster acknowledged that learning German had changed his perspective on Germans, making abstract enemies into individual humans with families, hopes, and dignity worth respecting. The friendship continued through correspondence until Klaus's death in 1992. Foster attended the funeral in Hamburg, meeting Klaus's children and grandchildren, describing to them how their father had been his informal German teacher in POW camp, how that teaching had created connection that lasted 50 years. The lesson. The blackboard where Foster first attempted to pronounce Guten Morgen represented something larger than simple language instruction. It symbolized British recognition that effective supervision required genuine communication, that managing prisoners meant treating them as human beings capable of understanding and responding to clear instruction, that dignity and respect produced better outcomes than contempt and hostility. The guards who learned German weren't being sentimental, they were being practical. But practicality that included respect for prisoners' language and culture was fundamentally different from practicality that treated prisoners as mere labor resources. The German prisoners who helped British guards learn their language were participating in small act of reconciliation. They could have refused, maintaining hostile distance from captors. Instead, they chose to help, correcting pronunciation, explaining grammar, facilitating communication that made their own captivity more bearable. The choice to help revealed something important about human nature, that even enemies could find common ground through shared language, that teaching and learning created connections that transcended temporary enmities. Foster's halting Guten Morgen and Klaus's patient correction became foundation for relationship that lasted 50 years. That relationship, multiplied across thousands of guards and prisoners in camps throughout Britain, helped create post-war reconciliation between former enemies. The language lessons were small gestures in context of total war, but small gestures accumulated into something larger. Transformation of enemies into humans, hostility into mutual respect, division into connection that survived long after war ended.